Welcome to the fifth of 6 videos from the Roman Army 2021 UofW lecture on unit organization. And in this fifth video, I'm going to say a little bit about where the auxiliary units were. And the last one, I said a little bit about Moesia. It was more empire at large. And this one, I'm going to focus more specifically on Moesia and the evidence we have for how we know where they are. Because there's so many auxiliary units, and it'll give you some idea of how we know. Okay, get rid of my face, and let's bring this up. Okay, so where were the auxiliary units? The case of the Moesia. So just a reminder, so here's my map of the Roman Empire, or one of my maps, my pink one, and I have my colorful one. There you can see the provinces, and the Moesias are over here. Okay, so sort of roughly modern day Bulgaria and the Balkans. Again, zoom in, okay, this is this part of the world here. There you can see Bulgaria, mountains, plains, valleys, etc. Okay, so our main source of information for where auxiliary units were are one piece of evidence that I've talked about a little bit when I introduce sources, and something we'll come back to occasionally in other circumstances, and that is the Roman military diploma, sort of a modern name for this document. This slide probably makes it seem bigger than it is, but it's sort of like a passport size thing, just to refresh, which gave you citizenship as a former current serving auxiliary and maybe some other things. We have tons of these, hundreds, thousands, sorry, and why they are useful for knowing where units were is amongst the much information they give us. They also include the specific date, assuming it's all in one piece, when the diploma was issued. Okay, so like this particular one, RMD, which is an abbreviation for Roman military diplomas, volume 5, number 335. One from Upper Moesia, which is closer to where Serbia meets Bulgaria, and this one dates to September 16th, 94 CE. So we have a specific date when the person who received this diploma, and anyone else who received one as well, received citizenship, and it shows us all the units that were in this province at this time. Okay, so it gives us the standing information, Emperor Caesar Domitian, blah 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 blah, and it says, and all those who served in the 3 ally, remember these are cavalry units, and the 9 cohortes, which are the 2nd Pannonian, the ally, blah blah blah. So it gives us the names. It tells us which units are in this province, in Upper Moesia, under this individual at this specific time. So we know that, these units were there. Now there could be other ones that aren't listed that just didn't make it, but it's probably a reasonably accurate depiction. Okay, so we can take all the known diplomas and then look at how the complement sort of changed over time. So in the year 75 CE, and one of the issues with using these diplomas is we don't have them for every year. We have lots of them. They don't really start till the reign of Claudius, and they don't really pick up in detail till a little bit later. So there's some gaps. It's harder to know for the first few centuries of first few decades of the first century CE, from Augustus to Tiberius, Caligula, and then to Claudius, Nero, etc. It's not to sort of later we get a better idea. So in this particular case, for instance, we know all these units were there in about 75 CE, the Ala Asturum, Ala Herculeana, etc. So that's a lot, okay, and some legions as well. Okay, but thanks to the diplomas, we know that 93, lots of things had happened. The province was one province, and suddenly it's 2 provinces, an Upper Moesia and a Lower Moesia, and we can see that there had been a number of new additions. Now, if my memory was better, I would remember why some of these are in bold and some of these aren't. But of course, my memory is dubious. I think these are the ones in bold are the ones that were there before. Okay, and then the ones that aren't are all the new ones that have come up in the interim. So you can see a lot of new units came up in this region since then. Okay, and this is using, again, the information from lots of diplomas. And you can jump a bit later, and I didn't highlight it here, but 138, this looks, eyeballing it, there are fewer auxiliary units. And we know that there had been lots of changes to that period as well. And we can go ahead to one more year and sort of pretty consistent numbers now in around 170. So these are not necessarily arbitrary chunks. The 4 dates a few decades apart in each case, and it gives us some sense of how the general disposition changes over time, but also dictated in part by the available evidence. We have diplomas for some years and not other years, and yeah, we know that change happened. And sometimes in the way that I said with the legions, one legion comes from a neighboring province, another one comes, but maybe it's a little more wishy-washy with the auxiliaries. So just as a final sense, though, does it give you an idea of just how much it changes over time? Let's move my face over here. Okay, so in 78 CE, this is just me counting the number of, so assuming that all those units were there, and it's probably pretty accurate at those different years, okay, using the information from diplomas and knowing what we know about how many people should be in one unit, and then assuming everybody was serving, okay, that gives us 10,500 legionaries, 12,736 auxiliaries in 78 CE. But you can see too that the numbers didn't stay consistent. They fluctuated a lot over time. New units would come in depending on circumstances, changes in overall strategic planning in the Roman Empire, changes depending on preparations for major conflict. So one of the interesting things we can see, and one of the reasons why Moesia is an interesting one to do, is if you look here, 78, so there are 12,000 auxiliaries, but then in 93, there were, 18,000 plus. So a big jump in legionaries too, but also a big jump in auxiliaries. And then in 100, it goes up again, okay, from, we're just pushing a little under 22,000 auxiliaries. And in this case, this is in the build-up towards Trajan's war against the Dacians. So the Romans planned for this conflict. They moved auxiliaries into the region in advance. It started actually before Trajan was emperor. That could have meant that Domitian, the emperor, was planning a big war himself, and then he died or assassinated before that happened. Either way, Trajan, who's around in 100, certainly was shifting things towards war with Dacia. And then once the war was over, 105-ish, 107, the numbers decreased as some were shifted into the new province of Dacia. It became many provinces, and it sort of stabilized. And if you look from 138 to 170, legionaries sort of stay stable too, but auxiliaries lessened and then stayed consistent after that. After 170, it gets difficult to know how things change because we don't have the evidence as much anymore. The diplomas still exist, but there are fewer of them that show any real changes, and then there are fewer of them in general, and they stop being used. Okay, so there's, hopefully gives you some idea that how we know. These diplomas show us how we know where the auxiliaries were, at least in a province. And again, there's other things to let us know which particular bases they were in. We'll talk about that with forts and fortlets. We know that they changed in provinces over time too. Some stayed there for a long period of time. Some of them might get transferred somewhere else. And we see that there was periods of relative stability and static in terms of numbers and size, but there were changes as well. Okay, so that ends the 5th video on unit order.